They thought I was too old to notice, too foolish to matter. But that day, when I stood in my own living room, surrounded by laughter that wasn't mine, with faces that smiled at me like I was an ornament on a shelf, I realized they'd already written me off. And that was their first mistake. It was my grandson's engagement party. My house, my food, my money. Yet, you wouldn't think that from the way they acted. The walls echoed with music, chatter, and clinking glasses, but not a single word of gratitude passed their lips, especially not from my son, Patrick, or his wretched wife, Clarissa. She pranced around in a dress that probably cost more than a month of my pension, flashing her fake smile, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light, earrings I recognized from the safe I'd once shown her. My late husband's gift to me. Now dangling from her ears like cheap trinkets. I stood by the side table, holding a glass of sparkling water. The wine was off limits for me, apparently, because Grandma gets tipsy too quick. The irony wasn't lost on me as Patrick poured himself his third glass of bourbon. I caught pieces of conversation, whispers slithering through the room like venomous snakes. "Old fool doesn't even realize what we've done," Clarissa muttered to a cousin, her wine glass tilting dangerously. "I mean, she's practically senile." They both chuckled. My fingers tightened around my glass, the coolness grounding me. My eyes didn't blink. I just watched. Listened. Remembered. Senile, was I? Funny. I wasn't senile when Patrick begged me for money 3 years ago, after his business fell apart. I wasn't senile when I sold off the vintage car my husband left me, just to pay off his debts. I wasn't senile when I mortgaged the beach house to send their son, my grandson, to college. Yet here I stood, the old fool, in a house they decorated with my money, hosting a party paid by the last of my savings. And still, I was invisible. Clarissa's laugh echoed again. "By the time she kicks it, there'll be nothing left anyway. We've already got our inheritance in advance." They thought I couldn't hear. But oh, I heard. Every word. Every sneer. I looked around the room. Not a single photograph of me on the walls anymore. They'd replaced the old frames with sterile decor, abstract art, minimalist mirrors, glass ornaments. My family erased me, piece by piece, from the very home I built. The worst part? My grandson Ethan, the one I'd done all this for, he barely glanced my way. Caught up in his fiancée's glow, in the laughter of his peers, as if the old woman in the corner didn't exist. He hadn't called me Grandma in months. Now I was just Sophia. I smiled to myself then. Not out of happiness, but from the clarity of pain. Because pain has a way of sharpening the mind, slicing away the fog. And in that clarity, I made a silent vow, they would regret every word. Every slight. Every time they looked through me, they forgot one thing: I may be old, but I am not powerless. I raised my glass, pretending to toast with the air, and whispered under my breath, "Let the games begin." It started with a simple act. I walked upstairs, unnoticed, of course, to my late husband's study. They assumed it was just a dusty old room filled with papers no one cared to read. But that room held the one thing that would change everything: the family trust. I sat at the mahogany desk, its surface still smelling faintly of cedarwood and ink. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one with a false bottom. My fingers, though aged, remembered the trick. A soft push, a slight pull, and there it was. A leather-bound folder, edges worn but still sturdy. Inside was the amended trust document, signed by me and my husband years ago, granting me sole control over every asset: the house, the remaining savings, the beach property, and a few quiet investments they never knew about. More than they could imagine. They thought they'd drain me dry. But I'd played along, watched them gorge themselves on what little I showed. Like rats scurrying after crumbs, never knowing there was a pantry behind a hidden door. I ran my fingers across the signature, my husband's name alongside mine. His words echoed in my memory: "Don't trust their kindness, Sophia. Keep control. One day, you'll need it." That day had come. Downstairs, laughter continued. They danced, drank, boasted about their future. But I sat there, upstairs, holding the power they thought I'd lost. And I smiled, not the smile of a foolish old woman, but of a queen reclaiming her throne. They wouldn't see a penny more, not a cent, and that was just the beginning. I returned downstairs, unnoticed by any of them, like a ghost lingering in the halls of her own home. Their laughter rang louder, the music grew bolder, but beneath it all was the stench of arrogance. I watched Patrick wrap his arm around Clarissa's waist, both of them swaying in tipsy harmony. They looked so smug, so sure they'd won, but I was done being their puppet. Later that night, after the last guest had left, Patrick cornered me in the kitchen. He smelled of bourbon and entitlement. "Mom," he said, voice thick with condescension, "good party, yeah? Clarissa said we should do more of these, you know, while you're still spry." Spry. The word hung in the air like a rotten fruit. "I'm sure," I replied, wiping the counter just to keep my hands from trembling, not from weakness, but from restraint. He grinned, thinking my silence was submission. Then he added, "Oh, and we'll need some more help covering the wedding expenses. Ethan's got big plans." I stared at him, straight in the eye. "Don't worry, Patrick. I have plans too." He laughed, clueless. Good, good. That's the spirit." I didn't respond. Instead, I went to bed, but sleep never came. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, hearing my husband's voice again. "When they show you who they are, believe them the first time." I believed them now. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I visited my attorney. Mr. Whitaker had been a friend of my husband's, a sharp, discreet man. He was surprised to see me after all these years. "Sophia," he said warmly, "to what do I owe this early visit?" I placed the trust folder on his desk. "I want it all transferred. Every asset. Every property. Liquidate what you can. Move the rest into accounts under my full control, no co-signers. And I want the house prepared." "Prepared?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I want them out. Every last one of them. And I want the locks changed." He studied my face for a moment. "They've finally crossed the line, haven't they?" I gave him a smile, cold and steady. "They called me an old fool. Let's see how foolish I am when they're standing on the sidewalk with their precious designer bags." He chuckled softly. "It'll be done." I left his office lighter than I'd felt in years. I wasn't just taking back my home, I was reclaiming my dignity. But I didn't stop there. Next, I visited the beach house. It had been sitting there, ignored by them because they thought I'd sold it. But I hadn't. I'd simply told them so, because sometimes the best hiding place is the one they think no longer exists. I spent 2 days overseeing a deep cleaning, renovations, and filling the space with touches of myself, photos of my youth, my husband's old records, the scent of lavender we both loved. It was my sanctuary now. Meanwhile, back at the house, Patrick and Clarissa remained oblivious. They lounged around, made plans, even scheduled a trip using my accounts that, thanks to Mr. Whitaker, no longer existed in the way they thought. When Patrick tried to use my card at a high-end store, it declined. He tried another. Declined again. Clarissa called the bank, her voice sharp with irritation, only to find that the accounts were frozen. Panic began to flutter in their voices. I watched, unseen, from the corner of the living room as they argued. "You said she wouldn't notice." Clarissa snapped. "She's old. I didn't think she'd." Their words faded when I stepped into the room. "Didn't think I'd what?" I asked calmly. They spun around, faces pale. Patrick tried to recover. "Mom, there must be some mistake with the bank." "There's no mistake," I interrupted. "I moved everything. I own this house. The accounts. The properties. Everything." Clarissa scoffed. "You can't do that." "Oh, but I can," I said, my voice as firm as marble. And I did. They stood there, mouths agape, like children caught stealing from the cookie jar. Patrick's voice cracked. "But where will we go?" I gave them the same cold smile they'd given me at the party. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. Spry as I am, I've decided I want my home back, and you're no longer welcome." Clarissa lunged forward, desperation tainting her polished image. "You can't just throw us out." "I can," I said, "and I will." I turned to leave, then paused. "You have 3 days. After that, the locks change." I didn't stay to hear their pleas. My heart was heavy, yes, but not broken. They'd broken that long ago. Now, I was simply putting the pieces back together, for me, and it was only the beginning point. 3 days. That's all I gave them. And with each passing hour, I watched the cracks in their facade grow wider. On the first day, they tried charm. Patrick knocked on my bedroom door mid-morning, his voice syrupy sweet, like when he was a boy asking for extra dessert. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened the door just a crack, just enough to see his familiar face, older, puffier, but still carrying the eyes of the son I once adored. But love has boundaries, and he'd crossed them all. "There's nothing to discuss," I said flatly, "but It's family, Mom. You wouldn't just toss out your own son. Family? I tilted my head. You remember that word now? Because the last time I checked, I was just an old fool to you. His mouth fell open, speechless. You'll have to find a new fool to fund your life, Patrick. I closed the door. His footsteps echoed down the hall, heavier than before. By the second day, the charm had dissolved into rage. I heard the shouting downstairs, Patrick and Clarissa hurling blame at each other, their whispers now venomous screams. This is your fault. Clarissa shrieked. You said she wouldn't notice. You're the one who kept spending. You and your designer crap. I married into this family thinking we had money. You lied to me, Patrick. I sat by my window, sipping tea, listening. Like it was a tragic play unfolding beneath me. And in a way, it was. Two greedy souls devouring each other when the well finally ran dry. Later that afternoon, Clarissa tried her turn. She approached me in the garden, where I was tending to my roses, the same garden she once mocked as Grandma's little dirt patch. Sophia, she said softly, crouching beside me in her designer jeans. I've been thinking, we've all made mistakes. Maybe we started off on the wrong foot. I didn't look at her. Instead, I clipped a dead stem, letting it fall to the soil. What foot was that? The one you stomped on every time you insulted me. She sighed, faking remorse. People say things they don't mean. I'm sorry. I turned to her finally, meeting her glossy eyes. I wonder, Clarissa, when you called me senile, was that before or after you stole my earrings? Her face flushed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. I stood, brushing dirt off my gloves. You have until tomorrow. Don't mistake my patience for weakness. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. Then the third day arrived. They didn't pack neatly. They grabbed whatever they could in frantic armfuls, clothes half folded, toiletries spilling from bags. Their empire of entitlement crumbled, and they looked pitiful, stripped of their arrogance. Ethan arrived that afternoon, summoned by his panicked parents. My grandson, the boy I'd sent to college, the one I'd loved more than life, barely looked at me when he entered. Grandma, can't you reconsider? He asked, his voice caught between frustration and embarrassment. You're making this messy. I stared at him. Messy is when your family uses you, Ethan. This is called consequences. But where will we go? I smiled faintly. You all should have thought about that before calling me a fool. Clarissa sobbed, Patrick cursed, and Ethan shook his head in disbelief. But I didn't waver. Mr. Whitaker's team arrived shortly after, along with the locksmith. The new locks clicked into place by sunset, the sound sharp and final. I stood at the window, watching as they loaded their last bags into the back of Patrick's aging SUV. Clarissa refused to look back. Patrick shot me a glare, his pride more bruised than his wallet. Ethan, he paused at the gate, as if wanting to say something, but he didn't. He climbed into the car, and they drove away, and just like that, the house was silent. I walked through every room, my rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. Alone, yes, but free. The air felt cleaner, the space brighter. For the first time in decades, I wasn't surrounded by takers. I'd thought I'd feel guilt. But no, I felt peace, and as I stood in the center of my living room, where once they laughed at me, I whispered to the empty air, foolish, am I? Not today. But little did they know, my revenge wasn't finished, because I had one final card to play. The house had never been quieter, but it wasn't empty, not really. Every wall, every piece of furniture still carried my presence. Without their noise, I could hear the house breathing again. It was my home once more, and yet, a home is too big when the echoes are your only company. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Instead, I prepared for the next part of my plan. Patrick and Clarissa thought being thrown out was the end of my wrath, but it wasn't. It was merely the opening move. The real sting was still coming, because I knew them, especially Patrick. Prideful, impulsive, greedy. He'd try to find a way back into my pockets. That was his nature, and so, I waited. Quietly. It didn't take long. A week later, my phone rang, an unknown number. But I knew it was Patrick before I even answered. Mom, his voice cracked, half forced humility, half smothered anger. We're staying at a motel. Clarissa's not handling it well. I remained silent. We just need a little help. Temporary, of course. Alone. There it was. The ask. Like clockwork, you want my help, I said slowly, after everything? I made mistakes, he admitted. But we're family, Mom. Blood. I almost laughed. Blood, that only mattered to them when they were bleeding. What about all those things Clarissa said? About me being a fool? Senile? That was just talk. You know how she is. And what about you, Patrick? What did you call me when you thought I wasn't listening? Silence hung heavy on the line. I was angry, he muttered. You know I didn't mean it. Oh, but you did, I said coldly. You meant every word. You both did. And now that the well's dry, you remember how to save Mom. How convenient. Please, he whispered, voice breaking. We have nowhere else. I almost pitied him, almost. But pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. I'll send you something, I said, relief flooded his voice. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. I hung up before he could finish, and I did send him something, but not money. I sent him a letter. In it, I included copies of the trust papers, property deeds, and bank statements. I highlighted every section that proved I was the sole owner of everything they'd touched. But the final line was my favorite: you taught me that family isn't who shares your blood, but who respects your worth. You've made your choice. Now live with it. But that wasn't all. I'd spoken to Mr. Whitaker about the family inheritance, the one Patrick thought he'd already drained. What they didn't know was that the inheritance wasn't just money. It was also a collection of investments and properties tied up in legal clauses. And the clause was simple: any heir found to have exploited, abused, or manipulated the trust holder shall be permanently disinherited. I had the proof. The recordings from that engagement party. I had saved the home security footage, there. Voices clear as day, mocking me, insulting me. I gave those recordings to Mr. Whitaker. Within days, the paperwork was finalized. Patrick, Clarissa, even Ethan, all formally stripped of any claim to my estate. My will was rewritten. The wealth, the properties, all of it was redirected to charities, scholarships for underprivileged students, and the local women's shelter where I'd once volunteered in my youth. I gave my fortune to those who truly needed it, not those who thought it was owed to them. Word got back to Patrick soon enough. I got one last call from him, a voicemail, slurred and bitter. You'll die alone, Mom. You'll regret this. But he was wrong. Because I wasn't alone. I had my peace, my pride, and the knowledge that I'd finally stood up for myself, and I had something even better: the beach house, where I spent my mornings with the ocean breeze and my evenings with the ghost of my husband's laughter. I kept friends close, real friends, not people who wore the mask of family. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, I thought about Patrick's last words. You'll die alone. I smiled to myself, watching the waves crash gently against the shore. Better to die alone with dignity than live surrounded by wolves wearing the faces of your children. And just like that, I found peace. But still, one part of me wondered, what if they come crawling back? I almost hoped they would, because this time, I wouldn't even open the door. For weeks passed, then months, and though the phone remained silent, the world was not. News has a way of traveling, especially in small circles where pride is currency, and disgrace is the debt everyone wants to discuss. Word had spread about what I'd done. Patrick and Clarissa, once the power couple flashing my money like their own, were now the cautionary tale. Friends stopped answering their calls. Invitations dried up. The same people who used to praise their style and sophistication now whispered behind their backs, calling them frauds, parasites, leeches. I'd stripped them of more than comfort. I'd taken their armor of pretense. And without it, they were just ordinary, and ordinary was unbearable to people like them. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, handwriting familiar but shaky. It was from Ethan. He wrote about how things had fallen apart since the eviction. They'd moved from one cheap motel to another, Clarissa threatening to leave every other week, Patrick drowning deeper in liquor and self-pity. He blamed me, of course. Called me heartless. But there was a line that stood out: you raised me better than this, Grandma. I don't know who that woman is anymore, but I miss you. I miss who we used to be. I read that sentence twice. Then again. But I knew better than to fall for nostalgia. Where was that sentiment when I was being mocked? When I stood alone at his engagement party, nothing but a purse with feet in their eyes. Still, his words stirred something inside me, a faint ache. Not forgiveness, but memory. The memory of holding him as a baby, of birthday mornings with pancakes, of Sunday afternoons reading by the fireplace. I wrote him back. A single page. No anger, no accusations. Just this: Ethan, the door I closed wasn't just to my house, it was to my heart. And that door doesn't open with regret alone. It opens with respect. When you understand that, you'll know where to find me. Until then, I wish you clarity. I mailed it, knowing it might sting him more than any curse could. Then, I returned to my quiet life, the life I had rebuilt, carefully, deliberately. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since my youth. Every stroke on canvas felt like stitching up an old wound. I painted the beach, the garden, sometimes even faceless silhouettes of a family that looked just a bit like the one I once had, though in those paintings, they were kind, gentle, a fantasy family. One that never existed. My days were slow, but never empty. I found comfort in simple routines: morning tea, long walks by the shore, books that carried me into other lives, other worlds, and people noticed. My neighbor, Helen, a widow herself, started joining me on walks. A retired teacher moved into the house next door, and soon we had small gatherings, just 3 or 4 of us, laughing over stories of youth and the silly aches of old age. For the first time in years, I had companionship not bought with money, not burdened with expectations. Just company. Then, one chilly evening, just as the sun was bleeding orange across the water, I saw a car pull up by the beach house. An old sedan, rusty and tired. It was Ethan. He didn't get out immediately. Just sat there, head bowed over the steering wheel, like he was rehearsing a speech. I didn't move from my rocking chair. I watched. Finally, he stepped out, looking thinner, older than his years, shadows under his eyes. He approached the porch. Slowly, cautiously, as if the wood itself might reject his footsteps. When he reached the steps, he stopped. Eyes glossy, voice low. "Grandma, I don't want money. I don't want to be them." Silence hung between us, heavy as the dusk. I took a long breath. "Why now, Ethan?" "Because you were right," he admitted, his voice cracking. "We used you. I used you. I watched them treat you like furniture and I said nothing. And when you fought back, I was angry because I lost comfort, not because I lost you." The honesty in his voice was raw, unpolished. It wasn't the charm I'd seen at his engagement party. It was real. And real was rare. I nodded slowly. "Sit." Then he sat on the porch steps, like a child again. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched the sky darken, the waves crawling back and forth like they were dragging secrets from the ocean floor. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance to earn it." I looked at him, really looked. And in his face, I saw traces of the boy I'd loved. The one who'd sit on my lap, asking for stories before bed. "You'll have to work for it, Ethan," I said. "Not with money. With character." He nodded, eyes wet but hopeful, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something stir in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. I'd built my walls high, but maybe, just maybe, not. Every door needed to stay locked. Days turned into weeks after Ethan's visit, and though he hadn't returned immediately, his words stayed with me. I'd expected that. True change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to shed the skin of who you were pretending to be. Still, I remained cautious. I'd learned that much. But then, one morning, as the sun peeked through the salt-frosted windows of the beach house, I found a package on my porch. No fancy wrapping, no glitter or ribbons, just plain brown paper and a note taped to the top. "For you, Grandma. I'm trying." Ethan. I brought it inside, curious but guarded, and carefully untied the string. Inside were supplies, brand new. Tubes of paint, pristine brushes, and a set of canvases, some large, some small. At the bottom, a folded piece of paper. "I remember the stories about you painting when you were young. I hope you're doing it again. I thought you might like fresh supplies. If not, you can throw them away. Either way, I just wanted you to know I'm listening." I sat in my kitchen chair, the morning light casting gold across the floorboards. The note crumpled softly in my hand, listening. Such a simple word, but so rare from them, and yet, still. I didn't reach out. I wanted to see if his sincerity was fleeting, or if it had roots. Weeks passed, and then months. And every few weeks, another small package arrived. A gardening book. A novel I'd once mentioned loving. Herbal teas. Each time with a small note, not begging, not apologizing, just updates. I've taken up a job at a bookstore. It's not glamorous, but I'm learning things I should have known years ago. Clarissa left. I guess she wasn't made for this life. I thought I'd feel empty, but honestly, I feel clearer. Dad's still angry. Drinking more. But I've stopped trying to fix him. I can't change a man who doesn't want to be changed. Each note was a thread stitching us back together, one careful pull at a time. It didn't mend everything, it couldn't, but it made the wound less raw. Then, one evening, a knock at my door. When I opened it, there stood Ethan, holding a plant. A little potted lavender, its purple blooms just beginning to open. I heard lavender helps with sleep, he said quietly. I stared at the plant, then at him, tired but earnest. Not the boy I raised, but a man trying to find his way back to decency. Come in, I said softly. He stepped inside, and for the first time in years, it felt right. We sat in the living room, surrounded by my paintings and books. The air warm with the scent of lavender and the ocean beyond. What are you painting these days? He asked, his voice gentle. People I've lost, I replied. People I wish I'd had. He nodded, understanding. I'd like to be in one of those paintings someday, he said. I looked at him, really looked. There was no greed in his eyes, no calculation. Just hope. Fragile, but real. Maybe one day, I said. But not yet. He smiled faintly. I'll earn it. We sat together, watching the fire crackle, saying little but feeling much. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. A beginning on my terms, because I'd learned that love, real love, is not blind. It sees everything, remembers every cut, every bruise. But sometimes, it still chooses to rebuild, brick by careful brick, not for them, but for me. I was still the queen of my own castle, still the keeper of my peace. And if anyone wanted to step inside, they'd have to come bearing more than just apologies. They'd have to bring respect, and that, I decided, was the only currency I'd accept from now on. Ethan kept his word. He didn't push, didn't barge back into my life like the others always had. Instead, he showed up once a week, always with something small in his hands, like a token of respect. Sometimes a book he thought I'd like, sometimes fresh bread from the local bakery. Once, he brought a stray cat he'd found wandering the alley behind the bookstore. She reminded me of you, he said with a crooked grin. She doesn't take to anyone easily. The cat, gray and scrawny with a torn ear, eyed me warily from the carrier. I knelt, slow and careful, and extended my hand. She sniffed it, let out a tiny huff, and then turned her back to me, but didn't run. I laughed. You're not wrong. I named her Martha, after my sister, who had been just as stubborn. Over time, the house changed. Not because I filled it with people, but because I filled it with life again. Paintings hung in every room, not of faceless families anymore, but of landscapes, oceans, skies. Freedom on canvas, and Ethan kept coming back. Sometimes he'd tell me about the bookstore, the odd customers, the old man who argued about the price of a paperback from 1987, the little girl who bought the same fairy tale book every month because she kept giving it away to friends. Other times, he'd sit in silence, helping me tend the garden. He never asked for money. Not once. He never brought up the past beyond small, careful reflections. One afternoon, as we trimmed the roses, he finally asked, "Do you ever hear from Dad?" I shook my head. Not since the voicemail. He looked down, nodding. He's angry. Lost. He still thinks you'll come crawling back. He'll die waiting, then, I said, firm. Ethan didn't argue. He just kept working, carefully, clipping away the dead petals. I don't want to be like him, he said softly. I was scared. I already was. You were close, I admitted. But there's still time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, Martha curled by my feet, and stared out at the ocean. I thought about Patrick. About the son I'd loved, the man he'd become, the father he'd been to Ethan, and I realized I didn't hate him. Not really. I pitied him. He was a man who measured his worth by what he could take, never by what he could give. And in doing so, he'd lost everything that couldn't be bought. I, on the other hand, had gained everything he couldn't understand: peace, dignity, and the quiet company of someone trying to rebuild, brick by brick. One morning, I asked Ethan, "Do you still speak to your father?" He hesitated. Rarely. It's always the same. Anger, blame, excuses. I nodded. If he ever asks about me, tell him I'm happy. Ethan smiled faintly. That'll drive him mad. Good, I said with a smirk. Months turned to a year, and by then, the beach house was alive with color and sound again, not from parties or hollow laughter, but from the crackle of the fireplace, the rustle of turning pages, the purring of a stubborn cat, and the occasional off-key humming of Ethan when he thought I wasn't listening. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in deep purples and golds, Ethan stood on the porch beside me. I've been saving up, he said. I'm thinking of opening a small store. Not just books, coffee, art, a place for people to feel human again. I looked at him, pride swelling in my chest. And will you ask me to fund it? He grinned. No. But I wouldn't mind your advice. I chuckled. Advice is free. Money comes with terms. He nodded, understanding. Then advice it is. We stood there in silence, watching the horizon. I thought of all the days I'd felt invisible, dismissed, used. And yet here I was, standing tall, a woman who'd taken her power back piece by piece. Grandma, Ethan said quietly, I'm glad you didn't give up on me. I looked at him, my heart heavy but full. You gave me a reason not to. And with that, I knew that I hadn't just taken revenge, that I'd built a legacy, not in money, but in respect, and that was worth more than every penny they ever stole. It was the first time in years that I looked at the future and didn't see emptiness stretching ahead of me. Instead, I saw possibilities, not just for myself, but for Ethan. For the small, fragile connection we had rebuilt, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Weeks later, Ethan brought blueprints with him. Simple sketches, hand-drawn, not perfect, but full of hope. He spread them out on my kitchen table, smoothing the creases. This is what I've got so far, he said, a little sheepish. It's small, but I think it could be something. I studied the sketches. A cozy space, a wall of books, a small cafe counter, a corner for local artists to display work. It wasn't just a business, it was a community in the making. You'll need investors, I said, glancing up at him. I know, he replied. But I'm not asking for your money. Good, I smiled. Because I wouldn't give it. He laughed, and there was no bitterness in his voice, just understanding. Growth. The boy had grown into a man, slowly but surely, but I did give him something else, contacts. Names of people I'd known from my younger days, old friends. Some in retirement but still well connected. Quietly, I wrote letters, made calls. And when I saw Ethan putting in the work, hustling day and night to gather funding and support, I knew I'd made the right choice. He wasn't Patrick. He was better. Then came the unexpected point. One evening, Helen, my neighbor, came by with gossip in her eyes. She settled into my parlor, sipped her tea, then said, You'll never guess who I saw downtown. I raised an eyebrow. Who? Your son, Patrick. I felt the air still around me. He looked awful, she continued. Older than his years, drunk, arguing with some poor shop clerk about a refund on a cheap jacket. He's nothing. Like he used to be. I nodded slowly, but said nothing. I didn't need to. I'd pictured this long ago, the man who thought himself too smart, too powerful, reduced to begging and barking over pennies. Helen reached over, squeezing my hand. You did the right thing, Sophia. I squeezed back gently. I know. But deep down, I wasn't celebrating. I didn't feel glee or satisfaction. Only a cold, steady certainty. Patrick had made his choices. And the price was his to pay. I didn't hear from Patrick, not directly. But once, months later, I got a letter, unsigned, but the handwriting was his. Short. Spiteful. You think you've won, old woman. But you'll die alone, and no one will care. I folded it neatly and threw it into the fireplace without hesitation. The flames ate the words, leaving nothing behind. I wouldn't give them space in my house, or in my mind, because the truth was simple. I was not alone. I had Martha, purring like a tiny engine of defiance. I had Helen, who brought me fresh scones every Sunday. I had Ethan, who visited with stories, dreams, and plans. And most importantly, I had myself. Whole. Unbroken. And then, one day, Ethan showed up, cheeks flushed with excitement. I did it, he said breathlessly. The store, it's funded. We start construction next month. I smiled wider than I had in years. You did it, I corrected. You. I wouldn't have gotten here without you, he said. I shook my head. Yes, you would have. But I'm glad you let me witness it. And then he surprised me. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was a key, a simple, unadorned brass key on a chain. What's this? I asked. It's the first key to the store, he said. It won't open much yet. But I wanted you to have it. I held it, heavy in my palm despite its size. A token, not of debt, not of obligation, but of respect. For the first time in a long time, I felt tears prick at my eyes. But I held them back. Steady, you've done well, I whispered. He smiled. You taught me how. That night, I hung the key by my bedside, where I could see it each morning. Not because I needed the store, but because I needed the reminder that dignity, once reclaimed, cannot be taken again. Patrick had stolen my peace once, never again. I'd lost so much, but I'd gained everything that mattered, my pride, my boundaries, my self-worth, and in that, I was richer than I'd ever been. Winter came quietly that year, the kind that blanketed everything in soft gray light and silences too heavy for words. Yet inside the beach house, there was warmth, the steady glow of the fireplace, the hum of a kettle, the occasional grumble from Martha as she claimed every chair as her throne. It was a cold morning when I received an invitation. Hand-delivered by Ethan himself. It's not much, he said, handing me the envelope, his cheeks flushed from the chill. But I want you to be there. I opened it carefully. A simple card, no frills, no grandeur. Grand opening, the Chapter House. Books, coffee, art, Saturday, 10 a.m. Come make memories with us. I stared at the card for a moment, tracing the embossed letters with my thumb. The Chapter House, a name that felt deliberate, thoughtful. A new story, not just for him, but for everyone who walked through those doors. I'll be there, I said quietly. Ethan smiled. It wasn't the wide, toothy grin of a boy seeking approval. It was softer, settled. A man proud of what he'd built, but still grateful for the road that led him there. Saturday arrived with clear skies, as if the universe itself decided to grant a blessing. I dressed in my best winter coat, the one my husband had loved on me, deep green wool, with buttons shaped like tiny leaves. Martha watched from the windowsill, her tail flicking with lazy disinterest as I stepped out. When I arrived, the store was already alive. Not crowded, but full enough to buzz, neighbors, families, curious passers-by. The smell of fresh coffee, mixed with the earthy scent of new books, and the soft melodies of a local guitarist playing near the entrance. Ethan stood behind the counter, an apron dusted with flour and ink. He looked up, and when he saw me, his eyes lit up, not with surprise, but with gratitude. Grandma, he said, coming around to meet me. You made it. I glanced around. Shelves lined with books from every genre, local artists' paintings. On the walls, a cozy reading nook with mismatched armchairs that looked like they belonged to stories themselves. And above the entrance, in delicate cursive, was a wooden sign. For every new chapter, there's a story behind it. I turned to him. It's beautiful. He rubbed the back of his neck, a little shy. It's a start. It's more than that, I said. It's a foundation. He led me to the reading corner, insisting I take the most comfortable chair. A waitress brought me a cup of tea without asking, chamomile, my favorite. As I sipped, I watched the store breathe with life. Children giggling in the corners, young couples flipping through poetry, an elderly man reading by the window with a content smile. This wasn't just a store. It was a heartbeat. Ethan sat beside me, watching the same scene unfold. I wanted to tell you. I named it the Chapter House because of you. I raised an eyebrow. Me? You showed me that no matter how ugly the last chapter was, the next one doesn't have to be the same. I want people to come here and start their own new chapters. I sat back, letting that settle in my bones. For all the bitterness, all the betrayals, there was still this legacy. Not the wealth I had feared would rot in greedy hands, but something better. A space born from respect, from lessons paid in hard currency of regret and reflection. I reached over, placed my hand on his. I'm proud of you, Ethan. His eyes glistened, but he blinked it away. That means everything, Grandma. I stayed most of the day, watching the store fill, empty, and fill again. The sun dipped low, casting golden light through the large front windows, and for a moment, I imagined my husband sitting beside me, smiling that quiet smile he always wore when he saw potential in something, or someone. Before I left, Ethan walked me to the door. Will you come back? He asked. I squeezed his hand. This is your place, Ethan. But yes, I'll be back. And maybe one day, I'll paint this place. I'd like that, he said softly. I stepped outside, the winter air sharp but invigorating. As I walked home, the sky shifting into dusk, I realized something important, something I never admitted to myself until now. This was my revenge. Not the eviction, not the disinheritance, not the fortune denied to the ungrateful, but this. A life reclaimed. A family rebuilt, even if it was just one person. A legacy forged not in gold, but in lessons. In respect. I wasn't an old fool. I was Sophia, and my story wasn't over yet. The air was crisp when I reached home, the kind of chill that wakes up your bones but leaves your spirit feeling alive. As I stepped inside, Martha greeted me with a disapproving glance, as if to say, out socializing again, were you? I chuckled softly and scooped her up despite her squirming. She was family too, my quiet, grumpy little companion. I settled into my favorite chair by the window, the one that faced the ocean, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the same heaviness that had long clung to my chest. There was no echo of Patrick's mockery, no lingering sting of Clarissa's sneer. All of that had been washed away, replaced by the warmth of the day, the gentle reminder that respect isn't something begged for, it's something demanded, earned, and maintained. My gaze drifted to the key Ethan had given me, still hanging on the hook by my bedside. A small token, but heavy with meaning. It wasn't just the key to his store, it was proof that not all was lost. That sometimes, even in a family broken by greed and betrayal, something good could still bloom if you nurtured it right. Then, as the sun began to set, bathing the sky in rich oranges and soft purples, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Full house tonight. Book club meeting, 20 people. They asked about you. Told them they'll have to wait their turn to meet the legend herself. Hope you're well, Grandma. Stop by soon? I smiled. A real smile, the kind that warms your cheeks and lingers. I replied, I will. Don't let them spoil the coffee without me. As I put the phone down, I thought of Patrick's last words, you'll die alone. But what he never understood, what he was too shallow to grasp, was that solitude isn't loneliness. Peace isn't emptiness. I hadn't died, I had lived. Fully, freely, on my own terms. I had chosen respect over blood, dignity over obligation, and peace over pretense. I had chosen myself. I stood, stretching my old bones, and opened the back door. The salty breeze carried in, wrapping itself around me like an old friend. The waves crashed gently against the shore, as if applauding a performance long overdue. I whispered to the wind, to my husband, to myself, I did it, love. I finally did it. And as the sky darkened and the stars took their positions, I sat back in my chair, Martha curled against my leg, a cup of tea warming my hands. I was Sophia, not a fool, not a wallet, not their stepping stone. I was the woman who had the last word, and that, I decided, was a story worth telling.